Hi everybody, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga. And I wanted to do a quick video today to go over some tips for new teachers. I'm recording this in the beginning of 2020, the beginning of the year, and I thought it would be a good time because I know towards the end of 2019, many of you may have graduated from your 200-hour teacher training, and you may now be at the point where you're ready to implement all of what you've learned. And at the same time, you might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So I wanted to share a resource with you because what I'm going to be sharing with you content-wise, I can also give you access to a download so you can download it and print it out. So I thought today I would do just a quick overview of what the tips are on the download. And also, I can refer you to my podcast where I go into this in great detail. So if you're a podcast listener and you're a yoga teacher, I know you're going to love my podcast, or I hope you do. It's called Conversations for Yoga Teachers, and you can find it on iTunes and Podbean. So let me get to some of these tips. The first thing is it's really helpful when you're a new teacher, and really all teachers, quite frankly, to have a standard sequence that you use. Now, I know that right out of the gate, you might be reacting to this statement and you might be saying, a standard sequence, my students are going to get so bored. Well, I can promise you that if you stick to a standard sequence, and by that I don't mean necessarily doing the exact same thing every time, you might switch up a couple of things, but the general flow and sequence, parts of the sequence, poses that you offer generally from class to class are going to be the same. And what this will do is this will not only give you something that you can teach enough so that you get really good at the cues that you use, but it will free you up so that you can really be there for your students. And this is the most important thing, because especially as a newer teacher, you're going to have so much going on in your head that it's going to be really hard to stay focused and present. And that is one of the key things that you need as a yoga teacher, to really be seeing your students and to not be caught up in what's going on in your head on an emotional level, or maybe you're judging yourself and maybe you're assuming how people are taking what you're saying. And so as you get more familiar with a standard sequence, it really allows you to present the poses, I don't want to say on autopilot, but with a higher degree of comfort that just comes from doing it over and over again. And that will free you up to really be able to see if your cues are landing, to really be present for students if you need to assist them, that kind of thing. I go into this a lot more in detail on the podcast episode, so let me move on to the next one. The next one is focus on action and alignment cues over anatomy-based cues. And the reason I say this is because, let's face it, if you just graduated from your 200-hour training, you're probably still completely overwhelmed by the concept of all the details of anatomy and how to share that in understandable ways with your students. I specialize in teaching anatomy to yoga teachers, and in all the trainings that I do, I always have people come up to me and say, you know, this is really the first time that I'm finally getting it. And a lot of that, quite frankly, has to do with the way I present it. I've learned how to cut to the quick and at the same time to be able to present anatomy in a way that teachers really get it and they understand how to share it with their students in the same way that I'm sharing it with them. Maybe it's a little less detailed, but the point is sharing it in understandable ways is really important if you as a teacher want to grow your impact beyond just the interaction with the student you're having right there in that moment, to when they're walking around, when they're exercising, when they're sitting at their desks, they're remembering things that you said in your class because you presented it in a practical way so that they can use it in their life. And that's one of the best ways that you can grow your impact. So as you're a newer teacher, you probably are still learning anatomy. So what can you do? Well, you can absolutely focus your cues on action cues and alignment cues. So action cues are really easy for people to get, and for the most part, pretty doable for yoga teachers to present. So there are things like just clear words, reach your arms up, root your heels down, squeeze your back thigh, center your hips. All those things are just really clear action words that people will get. You also can focus on alignment cues. Stack your knee over your heel, stack your shoulders over your hips, align your arms front to back, lean over to the side. So these are terms that help us understand the shape, right? The shape of the pose. And you definitely know that because you completed your teacher training and that was all of what you went through when you went through the postures. So definitely as you're starting out, focus your cues on action and alignment rather than taking on the additional challenge of bringing into play the anatomy and really just sounding like you're not really sure what you're saying. Or worse, to say something and deep inside you really don't know if it's right. Maybe you just hijack the cue from somebody else, assuming that they knew. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know the why behind the cue, it's really disingenuous to share it, because what happens if someone comes up and asks you a question? You're not going to be able to answer it. And additionally, at the end of the day, you want to be able to go home and feel like you taught a class where you shared things that you actually know, rather than just parroting things that you've heard. The next thing is, use cues that you could truly understand and could answer a question about after class. And this is a good segue. It relates to what I just said. And this is really, the basis for all of the training I do with teachers on anatomy. I'm really working with them to peel away what is the why behind the cue so that they really get why they're saying what they're saying from, in most cases, an anatomical standpoint. And then their cues have so much more power because they can change up the wording on the fly because they really know the why behind the cue rather than just rote memorization. And for many people, learning anatomy, that's what it is. It's just memorization without really the understanding. So again, as you're learning anatomy, focus your cues on action and alignment. And for the most part, as you completed your 200-hour training already, you'd be able to answer a question about that for sure. The next one is really try not to practice with your class. Now, I'm not saying you might not lay a mat out, but what I would suggest is that if you lay a mat out, you lay it out facing them. So when you're standing on the mat, they can see you, versus laying a mat out perpendicular to the class, meaning that when you demo something, you can't see them. You're turning side to side. Now, I know you might also be reacting to this one thinking, well, how are they supposed to mimic my alignment if I'm facing them? They're going to be able to do that. And what really facing them is going to achieve is greater connection between you and the class. In my opinion, there's nothing worse than going to a class and seeing a teacher do things on the mat when it's facing perpendicular to me. Because that just kind of cuts that teacher off energetically from the group. It's almost like they're performing yoga for me. I would much rather try to figure out from looking head on at a person what exactly is going on there if I needed the visual anchor, but I would feel like the person was more with me. And at the end of the day, when I'm teaching my classes, I really use the visual cues from looking at them to determine if my cues are landing well. And I absolutely won't be able to do that if I'm facing this way and I can't see them. Another thing is, really try as much as you can to have a set music list if you teach with music. I use Pandora and I use two stations, yoga workout music and yoga music. And that's really because I can put those channels on and I don't have to go back to my phone. I can just let it roll. There are no lyrics with those channels on any of the songs for the most part. So I know that there's not going to be something that comes up where the lyrics are inappropriate or the lyrics are maybe a trigger on an emotional level for someone in my class. I know I can just put it on and leave it. And again, as a new teacher, or all teachers really, you don't want to be messing with your music. You want to be there for your students and you don't want to have to worry about the music aspect once you turn it on. Maybe every once in a while you go over, lower the volume, turn up the volume, or turn it off entirely for Shavasana if that's your choice. But generally speaking, that's all you really need to do. So enough said there. And then the last one is, I know this is hard, but really as much as you can, try not to judge yourself and get caught up in what your students are thinking about you. There are so many assumptions we can make just by reading people's facial expressions. And that's really one of the challenges of teaching yoga. You're saying, and they're not, right? It's basically like you're having a conversation with yourself, because they're not saying anything back. And so all you're really doing is talking to a group and then watching how things land. You're using their physical bodies to give you information about how you might need to change your cueing to get, kind of more alignment from your students, or more action from your students, or more awareness from your students, but they're never really saying anything. And if you're feeling a little unsure, if you're feeling nervous, your head can really start to go into a place where you're making assumptions. Oh, that person doesn't like this class. Oh, this person thinks it's too hard. Oh, this person thinks it's too easy. And then all of a sudden you find yourself caught up in all those thoughts, and you've lost the group. You've lost your way. If you do find that that happens, just put them in a posture and breathe with them. Tell them to hold for 5 breaths, and you literally come into the somatic experience of your own body. Feel your feet on the floor, take a couple of deep breaths, and you'll find your nervous system will calm itself, and you'll be able to proceed. And sometimes in those moments, the best thing to do is to just push yourself to keep going. And in that nudging yourself along, you'll find that those thoughts will fade. And with experience, that's one of the best teachers, of course. And the more you do it, even when you're afraid, which I know takes a bit of courage, but if you stick to that process, you will eventually be able to let some of those thoughts subside. So what I'm going to do in the description of this video is include a link so that you can download this PDF, which has more detail than I've said, and will also give you this to reference. And I'll also include information about my podcast, which is called Conversations for Yoga Teachers. And episode 49 brings this to life, and this content I'm sharing with you here, even more than what I've done as well here on this video. And there are a lot of other episodes. There's 50 episodes so far, covering a wide range of topics, from anatomically based topics to teacher growth and personal development topics, business topics for yoga teachers. So it's really meant to be an all-around resource for you, the yoga teacher. So that's Conversations for Yoga Teachers on iTunes and Podbean. If you have any questions at any time, all you need to do is send me an email. My website is barebonesyoga.com. Thanks so much for watching. Namaste.